Security and IT teams are still working hard to shake off the perception of being dubbed the no team. Up next, learn how FinTech company GoCardless won over their entire organization, from employees to board members, with their forward-thinking data loss prevention program. We'll look at how they combined intuitive user warnings, powerful analytics, and reporting tools to help prove their business case and ultimately make the security team enablers, not blockers.
Thanks, Kelly, and welcome, everyone. I'm Henry, and for today's session, I'm joined by Punit from GoCardless, a customer of ours who we've learned so much from over the last 6 months or so. Today, we're specifically going to learn how they revamped their DLP strategy and won over their execs and employees along the way. Now, DLP and happy employees are two phrases that often aren't heard together. So really looking forward to digging deeper in today's session. Punit, first up, perhaps we can hand over to you for a quick introduction to yourself and also your role at GoCardless.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Henry. Sorry, excuse me. Hi, everyone. I'm Punit. I'm the head of business systems and IT at GoCardless. I've been here just over a year, joined at the crazy pandemic time. So it's been an interesting year plus. Prior to GoCardless is at WeWork and Uber. So clearly love like the hot startup journey and putting in cool tools. GoCardless is in the space of solving for payments. So whether that's recurring or one-time payments, we've just really done some really cool stuff with urban banking. You should check it out. We service payments across 30 different countries, and we process about 20 billion in revenue for our merchants every year.
Thanks, Punit. A really helpful overview, and yeah, a lot of data to protect there. I'd love to start with where your starting point was in DLP. DLP can be a really daunting project, I think, for many to tackle, whether it be unwinding legacy rule sets, assessing user disruption, and just investing a lot of time in figuring out how you're going to implement that project going forward. At GoCardless, what was your starting state with DLP?
Yeah, I think I'd say boring and daunting, right? Like it's one of those things that it's just kind of there and it can be disruptive to users. So I guess our starting point was like I said, it was kind of just there. We used Google DLP to kick off with and the inbuilt DLP tools. And we found those like a little bit, I'd say, complex to configure. So we're coming to this realization before like everything just, and we'll talk about this further, like everything just happened and we went to market to look for somebody better, is we realized we need an admin of its own. It's just configure a bunch of policies that just block stuff for our users all the time. And that didn't seem very like user in mind. So I'd say that's our starting point is Google-based DLP tools, bit boring, bit daunting, like you've said, and just there.
Yeah, I think also in a fast growth company like GoCardless, you can't afford for things just to be there because they get in the way of doing business. The other thing that I think was a really good point is traditional DLP is revolved around someone having to constantly configure and assess rules, and then ultimately you're introducing human error into the equation because it's like, how well does that person know the entire problems of your entire user base? What was it that instigated you guys to start thinking about, okay, we need a new approach?
Yeah, I think we needed an approach in the first place. So we had an incident where somebody sent a file to a friend instead of to the right recipient. And we got a bit lucky where the friend said, oh, did you really mean to send me this file? And it was an important file that probably shouldn't have gone to the friend. And you know, the person in FinTech caught that and came straight to us and said, hey, like, do we have a way of stopping me from sending things I shouldn't to the wrong people? And we're like, maybe let's go and have a look at it. So we weren't like intentionally looking at DLP, but it's one of these things where it allows us to be user-led as well. So our users will come into us with a problem and going, hey, I've made this stupid mistake. What should I do? And can you do anything to help me not make that mistake again? So that's what really led us down the road of going, we should look at this problem. We should look at inbound and outbound DLP and see if we can make it easy for our users not to do things that are going to be harmful to them in the business.
I love that. To have employees not just saying self-reporting like, hey, this has happened, but how can we stop this going forward is really powerful. How have you got your employees to that state where they're actually coming forward and saying, hey, how can we stop it going forward?
Yeah, I think it's part of that kind of scale up workforce culture, right? Where people are expecting not to do things by themselves constantly. If you look at all aspects of mostly business systems and IT, there's a huge focus today on automation and self-service. So people are used to working in organizations where you're not having to report things, you're not being blocked by things, you're really being enabled to just get on with your work. And the expectation is that IT teams and business teams and security teams are becoming more and more self-service and putting the control in the hands of the users. And that just really allows people to not worry about these things and just get on and just be productive and work.
Yeah, that's awesome. It also, I think, creates a really strong tie between the security team and your users, because it feels like it's one team who's trying to achieve one thing rather than security team trying to lock down users to prevent data leakage, which isn't their problem.
Yeah, I think there's this legacy kind of, sorry, Henry. I think there's this legacy kind of perception of security blocks everything. And I think in this instance where it's not security doesn't block anything. It's we've given the control to the users and the users decide what is right and what is wrong.
Yeah, completely agree. I think also in working environments like GoCardless, and I've got friends who work at GoCardless and rave about it as a company, you can't afford to lock people down because it's such an empowering environment for people to work and act like business owners that security can't just go against that ethos because it kind of undermines what you're doing as an organization.
Yeah, I'd say like even when we're attracting talent, one of the things we look at is letting people know that it is a company and a culture where you're empowered and enabled to get on with work and do what you think is right.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And love to see that being reflected in the security strategy as well. Perhaps going on to kind of Tessian and what you were looking for when you set out on that journey of finding a security partner, and maybe a little bit about some of the work that you've been doing with Tessian around plugging these gaps and data loss prevention.
Yeah, so when we went looking for the right partner, I think the things that were front of mind were whatever we chose had to be easy to use, had to be easy to implement, had to be easy to administer. So I was managing a small team last year, so it couldn't be anything that required tons and tons of work for my team to implement. It couldn't be something that required tons and tons of documentation to be written. It couldn't be something that required huge amounts of user training. It had to be quick, easy to use, quick to deploy, easy to deploy. A lot of support from the vendor would be required to get it out if we needed that support. Had to be self-serviceable, had to be really, really intuitive. So that's our approach to how we were looking for the right partner. And sorry, I'm going to ask you to repeat the second part of your question, Ari. I missed a bit of that.
No, I was going to say, maybe like an extension of that, like that's what you were looking for. How's the experience been in terms of the work that you've started doing with the Tessian platform and how that's changed your perception of what DLP looks like?
Yeah, I think it actually hit the nail on the head, right? Like with Tessian, it's like I said, like it's just going to sound a bit repetitive now. Self-service, intuitive, where people are looking at data loss prevention. I've got a really good quote actually from one of our sales team that they shouted out saying, "Hey, I just wanted to give you kudos for implementing testing security. Saved me from an awkward conversation." So our users are looking at where they should have maybe BCC'd somebody or not BCC'd somebody or chose the right salutation or chosen the right name. And they're coming back to us and saying, hey, that product you've put in is really awesome. And they are now thinking about data loss prevention versus just it being driven through security and IT.
I love that quote. I think it all comes down to the fact that data loss prevention is not a technology problem, it's a human problem. And when you implement the right solutions, it has a real material impact on employees. And whether that be like an employee feeling less bad when they do something because Tessian is going to warn them. I think for so long, DLP has fallen into this tricky spot of hundreds of man hours to deploy. Once it's deployed, you fall, it's like a sunk cost fallacy that you don't want to make a change until you need to make a change, which is a dangerous position to be in because it requires a breach to happen before you need to make that change. So yeah, having users at the front of it is just such a great way to overcome that and make, as I said, a human problem, not a technology problem. I'd love to go a bit deeper on the user part because I think it's a really key part of your philosophy and we talk about like how you won users over, um, how was the feedback initially when you implemented with users? How did you garner that feedback, and how did it change their perception of what security controls can be like?
Yeah, I think I'd say overwhelmingly there was a positive response to our deployment of Tessian at the business. People, especially the exec team, were coming to us quite quickly and saying, "Hey, this is really cool. We're going to stop data leakage. We were able to catch a couple of incidents that we maybe wouldn't have otherwise." So overwhelmingly, there was this really, really positive response to, "Hey, this tool's really awesome. I didn't know we could do this kind of stuff." Where, for example, I went to send this email, Tessian sends me an email back saying, "Did you really mean to send that email?" Right. Well, like I said, with the Google DLP tools, things were just being blocked in this black hole and nobody knew their emails were being blocked, whether that was inbound or outbound. So there was more visibility for the users on what was actually going on. And I think it kind of gave the users more of an education on this is what we perceive as risk and this is what we don't perceive as risk, right? So that was really cool. I think I'd say on the feedback that where we could have done a bit better is obviously salespeople are constantly going out and sending a ton of emails, and they are probably more prone to making bad, I wouldn't say bad choices, but wrong salutations, wrong names and emails, wrong BCCs, or being recognized as spam. So on the former, it was quite positive feedback. And that's a quote I just read you was from a salesperson, right? They were really, really grateful that we'd got them out of some awkward conversations of sending, I don't know, Henry's email to Karina or Karina's email to Henry by mistake, right? But they were also coming back to us with, "Hey, a lot of the emails I actually do want to send are being blocked. What do I do?" I think when you talk about ease of use and ease of administration, it was really easy for us to set up a user group within Tessian that said, "Stop these people from being caught so aggressively and tone the filter down." And the salespeople would just be able to then get on with their job. So yeah, that I think that summarizes quite well the feedback we got within the business.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love the way as well that the security team then can be seen as, not just implementing non-obtrusive solutions, but removing blockers really quickly. And as you said, it goes on to like this enablement part as well. One of the big things that we see coming back in customer feedback is that the way that Tessian, and I would say like broadly like a machine intelligent approach to security, where it relies on behavioral intelligence models, understanding behavior, surfacing the right information at the right time. The way that it does that can create really what we call positive security moments and like reinforce a security culture. How do you guys think about fostering that security culture and reinforcing a security culture across the organization? And then what role does, I guess, like Tessian play in that broader strategy?
I'd say I think if you start with removing the negative perception, right, and the negative connotations associated with security often has a big brother, we're looking at everything kind of perception within businesses. And the role Tessian's played at GoCardless into changing that perception is, I'm going to say this again, like putting the power in the hands of the users. I think I've said that about 4 times today, right?
No, we love it.
We are not.
It.
We are not being seen as the people that are watching. We are not being seen as the people that are big brothering. We are not being seen as the people that are blocking things, right? I think it's as a user within the business, because I get told what I'm doing, I know somebody else is not watching. And the communication piece and the user story behind that is, hey, you are enabled to do what you want and we trust you to get on with your work and do all the right things. And if you don't do the right thing, then, hey, we're going to tell you you're not doing the right thing. And then if you still choose to do the wrong thing, then that's a different conversation, right? So it totally changes the perception of security from a big brother, a monitoring kind of team to we enable you to get on with your work, but we're also watching from afar because you get 2 chances to say no. And then if you still say yes, then there are consequences.
That is a different conversation, yeah. I think it's very like timely as well. I think it's a great approach and very timely with everything that's happened over the last 18 months, year or so, where empowerment has to become more central to how we manage our workforces. Like with people no longer in the offices, you have to entrust that they're doing the right thing, that they're working in a more empowered way. And I think having security kind of reinforce that is a really powerful way to kind of like hit home with users. Now, Punit, for a technology leader, I love the way that you speak so much about the user impact and the user stories. I think it's really rare, and I think it's why we've really connected working together over the last 6 months or so. Would love to come on to your team more and the IT team and security teams and the impact that implementing Tessian as your new DLP solution has had on your security teams. What has it meant for their day-to-day?
Easy. They're not doing like really boring, repetitive things like watching what's going on, right? There's this previous world where you're spending a ton of time configuring complex rules, and there's this previous world where you're constantly having to flag people to be watched, or you're having to monitor certain mailboxes, or you're having to monitor certain activities, and drive what's going on in Google Drive. With Tessian, it's allowed us to not have to do that anymore, right? Which is like there's less noise. We're only looking at what we really need to look at. So we're not looking at everything. We have that nice integration into Splunk, which alerts us and monitors and alerts us on all the relevant things. We're not Tessian's configuring itself for us with the AO, right? So we're not having to constantly update rules, change rules, configure rules based on user behavior. Tessian's doing that by itself for us. So we're spending more time thinking of the art of the possible with Tessian and what could be done. What's next? Like I talk to you all the time, Henry, about like what are you doing for DLP next? What are you doing for DLP next? And it allows us to think outside the box and those things versus do low value repetitive work, which really doesn't provide much value back to the business.
Yeah, I love that. It's almost like this concept of the SOC teams, security teams, IT teams can be way more proactive with how they're thinking about removing those pains from the business and, like building towards their strategy. And at the end of the day, the people that you employ, and I know this because we've worked closely with them, are highly skilled individuals, and they should be used for highly skilled work rather than trawling through loads of logs, which may not be relevant. And of course, when you go into that realm as well, there's always the opportunity for human error. And we want to make people's lives easier by saying, hey, here are the things that you really care about. And then they can focus on actually remediating those things rather than just identifying them in the first place. How's that changed your team's perception of kind of like where they can focus their time? So let's say they identify specific issues that Tessian has alerted to them through Splunk or through certain automated notifications. Where does that mean that they can then spend their time in terms of remediating it? And does that mean they spend more time in building a better relationship with the business because they're focusing on things that the business know are important?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things, right? Because there's less noise, what's coming in needs a lot more attention and diligence. So we're being able to be more focused on the things that are actually coming in through Splunk, and we know that actual incidents versus there's a really low rate of false flags. So we know that whatever we're getting is real, right? There's no bad noise around it. I think the other thing it allows is outside of the stuff Tessian flags to us, there's this real opportunity to. So we're always trying to do more with less, right? So it's how much more work can we do without having to hire linearly? And what this really allows us to do is, because there's less noise coming in, we can spend more time working on the things that should actually require our time and dedication. So real incidents outside of DLP, real security breaches incidents, endpoint incidents, any other security issues, they can spend time and focusing on those and really digging deep into how to make those problems go away versus dealing with noise that was coming in previously.
Yeah, awesome. So users get more empowered, your kind of SOC teams have saved time and they're focusing on the more impactful issues. I'd love to go on to reporting and how you play that narrative internally and ultimately how you make yourself and your teams look good for implementing something like this and use that to drive better exec engagement in terms of future risks that you need to solve for. Firstly, how do you use the Tessian data to communicate the business value of not just Tessian, but solving for those specific risks that you solve for?
Yeah, I think there's two parts, right? How do we use the data for training, and how do we use the data to report back to the business, right? So on the training piece, that's a really interesting piece for us is it allow a lot of the data, all of the data we get from Tessian really tells us where our problems are. And if you look at the, you're going to correct me on the term, but I think it's the human layer risk hub. With that,
Correct.
it
Gold
tells us
star.
it's a nice, yeah, cheers, mate. It's a nice diagram that tells us how people are scoring within the business in different elements of security and data loss, right? Now, the nice thing about that is I don't have to go to the whole business and say everybody needs to get better at looking out for phishing attempts, or everybody needs to get better at not sending bad emails out, or bad salutations or bad information to the wrong people. It's really targeted. So I can say these 10 people need training in, stop clicking on malicious links, and these 15 people need better education on how to send outbound emails. It means our audience is a lot more engaged with the training, because if you sit through training that you've already received and it's not a problem area for you, you're normally going to switch off and it's wasting your time and our time. So our user training is a lot more directed and not prescriptive, I can't think of the right words today, a lot more effective for that user audience. So I think that's a massive, massive win for us. And it means our security team are spending a lot more time doing the right things for the business, right? I think from a reporting data perspective, it also allows us to highlight and identify what the real risk is. There's a world we used to live in where we'd say, oh, we need to work on DLP, or we need to work on phishing attempts, or we need to work on outbound emails or data exfiltration. Now, with the data that Tessian gives us, we can see how much of a real threat versus perceived threat that is, and go back to our execs and ask for the right resources and the time to address the right problems.
Yeah, awesome. I want to take both of those in turn because I think there's some really great points made. Firstly, you're right. For so long, security awareness training is like one size fits all. Let's apply these modules of training to everyone and expect them to be really engaged. But that's not how it works. And when you can focus on the employees that actually need that training and are going to be receptive to it because they know that it's going to help them as well, it becomes way more impactful. And I love the way that you use the human layer risk hub and our risk scoring to identify where to focus. It's increasingly where we're seeing like Tessian kind of help our employees when it comes to user training. And then from an exec perspective, I think completely agree. They want to see the business impact, which then gives you the buy-in to go and solve these other problems. In terms of, what we've seen some customers do is actually use examples of breaches that have been prevented, employee education events that have occurred through Tessian, and play that back to the business to say hey guys, it happens to everyone, but we're working to stop it together to create that more positive security culture, get people thinking about this, and also normalize the fact that this stuff happens, but we have systems in place to help us. Have you guys ever considered anything like that when it comes to training users and actually playing back to them real world examples?
Yeah, I think we do that all the time. I think actually the magic has been that because the users are being educated through Tessian, right? This should have happened or this shouldn't have happened for this reason. It means we're training less on, hey, this is the data we've got, this is what we should do, and more on the story we're able to tell is because of Tessian, we've seen a reduction in number of, bad acts, bad outbound emails, bad inbound emails that actually been actioned that shouldn't have been actioned. So I think actually our story, I feel, is a little bit more powerful in that we're not going back and using the data to say, oh, more and more of this is happening, we should focus here. We're spending a lot of time going less and less of this is happening because of Tessian. This is why Tessian is a really good investment for us.
Yeah, awesome. I love it. I think, when we look at old DLP of, policy-based controls versus highly relevant behavioral intelligence suggestions from something like Tessian, I think the big difference is that previously someone will see a warning and they won't know why it applies to them because they don't know the keyword that the policy is looking for, so they tend to ignore it. Whereas when Tessian surfaces something, your users are smart and your users know the importance of data security. And when something that is very relevant is flagged to them and they say oh yeah, you know what, that's a good catch, what a great reminder in the moment, it becomes a really, really powerful training event. And as I said, a positive security culture reinforcer. I think we're coming up to time, Punit, but it's been awesome to hear how you guys have gone about revamping your DLP strategy and not just through empowering users, but reducing time for your SOC team and then also playing that value back to execs. Really appreciate you taking the time to chat to us today. looking forward to continue to working with you guys going forwards. Yeah, and thank you very much.